Good afternoon, or morning, or evening again. Here is the part 5, Came Music and Appreciation, the Romantic Era, and we are picking up with chapter 3. So this is the second of the 3 lectures I'm going to do on this particular section. Chapter 3, we start to talk about some more specific genres and things that they created in the Romantic Era, and we're going to look at a few composers who did this. We're going to do a little listening. So, we start with the art song. The art song, which is called Lied, L-E-I-D in German, is L-I-E-D, sorry, in German, is a composition written for a solo singer and a piano accompaniment. Now, even though we call it accompaniment, the fact is that the piano and singer are equal in this. It's not a homophonic kind of thing where the singer is singing the melody and the piano is just playing very simple accompaniments. Piano is a very important part of the art song. Art songs are usually poems, sometimes written by the composer, but much more often the composer would read books of poetry and look for songs or poems that inspired them, and then they would set those to music. A lot of the art songs of the Romantic era, well, they're about the typical romantic influences. Nature is a big influence. Supernatural is an influence. Unrequited love, in other words, you love someone, they don't love you back, because that's a great opportunity to emote, and so that's a big thing for the art song. Singers, when they sing art songs, nearly always sing from memory. We have any number of voice majors here at Delaware State who have given recitals over the years with just piano and the singer. Now these songs tend to be in a few different forms. That is the way they arrange the music. We've talked about form many times, A-B, A-B-A, or A-B-A-C-A-D, things like that. But there are 2 basic forms, really 3 basic forms that a song may be in. One of them is called strophic. This is a very standard form. That's when you have multiple verses of lyrics, but you only have one set of music. If you've ever seen a hymn, a church hymn, for example, where you've just got one block of music, but you've got, in this case, 5 verses, that is strophic, where the music repeats and you have new words with every verse. Could be 2 verses, could be 5 verses, could be as many as you want. As opposed to through composed, when a composer writes an art song and there's new music for every verse and nothing repeats, that is called through composed. There's also a third form called modified strophic, which is basically strophic where things repeat, but then sometimes you add some music or you change some music occasionally, and that's called modified strophic. Now, the greatest composer of art songs who ever lived was a Austrian from Vienna named Franz Schubert. Schubert was born in 1797. He died in 1828, died only at the age of 31. Schubert died of syphilis, which is something that actually, as we look through history, a surprising number of artists, famous artists and musicians, die of syphilis. This is long before the invention of penicillin, and STDs could be deadly back then. He made his money only by composing. He didn't conduct. He wasn't a music critic. He didn't really teach. What he did is he wrote music and he published it, and then whatever royalties he got, that's how he lived. He didn't live an extravagant lifestyle. He spent most of his days hanging out in beer gardens, in bars, writing music, reading poetry, writing music, and then that night he would get together with friends and they would have parties that they called Schubertiads, where they would perform the music that he just wrote that day. He was the first master of the art song. He basically just hung out with other musicians. He died at age 31, but in those 31 years, he wrote over 900 pieces of original music, over 600 art songs. He also wrote symphonies, 9 symphonies, great symphonies. His 8th and 9th symphonies are absolutely at the top of the repertoire. String quartets, lots of chamber music, solo piano music, he wrote some masses that are very popular, Catholic masses. Austria, even after the Protestant Reformation, Austria remained Catholic. So it wasn't unusual to see Austrian composers like, for example, Schubert, or like, Mozart. There's another example of an Austrian composer who wrote Catholic masses. What did he write these over 600 songs about? Oh, lots of things. Nature is a big influence. The supernatural is an influence. General unhappiness and unrequited love is one of the subjects. Common subjects for the Romantic artist. So I'm going to post a link to a video of a piece called the Erlkönig, which translates as the Elf King. This is an art song that Schubert wrote when he was 18 years old. It's pretty creepy. This is a specialized form of art song called a ballad or ballade, which focuses more on the supernatural. Basically, the story is this. A father is riding on his horse with his child in front of him. His child is very sick. His son is very sick, so he's riding to get home so that his son can see a doctor. The son starts hallucinating. He sees the Erlkönig, or Elf King, which is a German figure from mythology who is kind of like the Grim Reaper. The Erlkönig comes to take you away into death. And so the son is hallucinating, or is he hallucinating? We don't know. And he keeps seeing the Erlkönig coming first by talking to him and trying to convince him to come away willingly, and then threatens to drag him away by force into death. The singer, there's only one singer and piano, and the singer actually sings 4 roles: the narrator, the father, the son, and the Erlkönig. So it requires the singer to change their timbre a little bit, to change the way they're singing, so you can sound like 4 different people. It starts with the piano banging out a triple rhythm, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which sounds like the galloping of a horse. So at this point, there is a video linked for the Erlkönig. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story. I don't want to spoil it for you. The next of the great composers that we're going to talk about is Robert Schumann. Now, we got Schubert and Schumann. Very different people. Robert Schumann was German. He's not Austrian. He was born in 1810. He died at age 46. Again, from a family, his father was a bookseller. So we're actually, unlike back in the Baroque era, where it seemed like many of the musicians were the sons of musicians, now we're starting to see professional musicians who come from all walks of life, all kinds of family. He was a composer. He started out as a piano player. Now, this is the interesting thing. He wanted to be a great piano player. His career goal was to be a virtuoso piano player, but he actually injured his hand. He was using a mechanical hand strengthener and finger exerciser, which I've seen pictures of something similar. It looks kind of like a wooden glove, but it's got like cables all over it, and you like turn a crank, and it would supposedly stretch your fingers out and exercise your hand. Instead, it crippled Schumann's hand, so he had to give up his goals of becoming a concert piano player. Instead, he dedicated himself entirely to composing. His composing was very personal. It's autobiographical in many ways. There are people that he knows in his own personal feelings. Now, I mentioned before, when I was talking about how composers made a living, Schumann actually started a magazine, the New Journal for Music, which is a very popular classical music magazine. And yes, believe it or not, at one time in history, there was such thing as a popular classical music magazine. He married his piano teacher's daughter, Clara. She was quite a few years younger than him. She was 17 when they got married. He was in his mid-20s. They actually had to go to court and sue to get her father, because her father would not give permission. They got married. They were very happy together, and she was also a great musician. We'll talk about her in a moment. Schumann had some emotional problems and mental instability. Today, Schumann would probably be diagnosed as being bipolar and suffering from auditory hallucinations. He used to hear a note, not even music, but a single note, an A, in his head over and over and over. It just wouldn't stop. And it eventually drove him to try and kill himself. And he died in an insane asylum, a mental institution, when he was 46 years old. That's another example of what we've talked about, how a lot of times some of the greatest artists throughout history have not been entirely stable people. And some people think maybe that's one reason why they could create great art. Schumann was known for a lot of different kinds of music. He started out composing for the piano, and then he composed songs. He's also a great composer of art songs, just like Schubert was. But he also wrote symphonies, he wrote chamber music, but we're going to kind of focus on his piano pieces as we talk about him today. His art songs, he would write not a single standalone songs all of the time, but sometimes he would write something called a song cycle, where he would write 20 songs and they would all be somehow linked. And they were intended to be performed as a whole set, like a 45-minute concert, a 45-minute concert of not just songs, but of his songs on this subject. Like one of his art song cycles is titled A Woman's Life in Loves, for example. And every song is about that subject. Song cycles can be linked by subject, they can be linked by poet. For example, Goethe Lieder is a set of art songs that are all based on poems by Johann Goethe. They could be linked somehow musically. They could be just linked about the subject, but be by different poets. So there are a lot of different ways that you could write a song cycle, but each song is a separate chapter in the whole, the entirety of the song cycle. He also did the same interesting thing with his piano pieces, where he would write a bunch of short piano pieces that were somehow linked, and he would give these titles, like Butterflies is one of his collections of piano pieces, and Carnival, or Masked Ball, is another one. We're going to listen to a piece of his from that. He used a lot of interesting rhythms to try and keep the music involving for the listener. He was a very emotional person, as we've talked about, and very personal, and his composition is very personal, and he really poured this into his music. I'm just going to keep going. So we're going to listen to a couple of his short pieces. These are actually very short. One of them, Estrella, is only 40 seconds long, 50 seconds long maybe. This is from Carnival. Carnival is a set of 21 short piano pieces that kind of represent all the different people that you might meet at a party. And many of these have titles of people that he personally knew. One of them he named Chopin. Chopin is another one of these famous piano composers who I'm going to talk about in just a minute. One of them he named Estrella, who was his fiancée, former fiancée. So I'm going to link, I'll post videos of two of these pieces being performed. As I said, they're quite short, but they're very emotional, they're very passionate. Now, Robert's wife, Clara, was a great musician. She was one of the great piano players in all of Germany, and she was also a terrific composer. Although in society at that time, women, well, I mean, at no time up to all the periods that we've talked about at this point, were women taken seriously as composers, with very few exceptions. You go all the way back to the Middle Ages. We talked about Hildegard von Bingen. There were some during the Renaissance and into the Baroque, but not very many who got any kind of play at all. So Clara Schumann, while she was a great composer, her music was not performed all that frequently. Now, after her husband Robert died, she committed herself entirely to his music. She more or less stopped composing, and she toured around just performing Robert's music and promoting Robert's music. They were very much loved. They were very dedicated to each other. I'm going to provide a link to a piece that she wrote, a romance. It's a romance in E flat, and it was dedicated to her husband Robert. It's a really beautiful piece of music. She was a great composer, and as I said, she didn't get the credit she should have gotten. And then after her husband died, she stopped composing. So we've got Franz Schubert, we've got Robert Schumann, and now we've got Frederick Chopin. Looks like Chopin, but it's pronounced Chopin. Chopin only lived to be 39 years old. In his case, he was never in great health. He was quite frail. He had various lung issues, like I think he may have had asthma, maybe at some point. You know, today he might be diagnosed with COPD, which is several different lung ailments all rolled together. He was Polish. He was born in Poland. He moved to Paris, where he spent the vast majority of his productive life. But he never forgot his Polish heritage, and this is reflected in a lot of his music. He was a very shy composer, very shy performer. He didn't give big concerts like other great piano players did. He preferred to perform, when he did perform, in small spaces for small gatherings. but he was best known as a composer. Um, He earned the majority of his money by writing and selling music and by teaching lessons. In Paris, he taught lessons to the daughters of the extremely wealthy. He charged a lot of money because he was famous, and that's how he made himself a decent living in Paris. He had a long relationship with the French poet George Sand. George Sand was her pen name. There's actually a very good movie about this. If you're looking for something to watch, actually, maybe I'll put this on Blackboard. There could be a whole list of great music movies that you could watch on Netflix or through other streaming services while we're all at home. Amadeus, I already mentioned once. It's about the life of Mozart. There's a great Beethoven movie called Immortal Beloved that stars the brilliant British actor Gary Oldman. You probably know best as playing Commissioner Gordon in the Christian Bale Batman movies as Beethoven. Great performance. Then there's a movie called Impromptu, which is actually about Chopin and his girlfriend George Sand. That's a pretty good movie. It was better than I thought it was going to be. Chopin wrote just a ton of piano music, pretty much only composed for the piano. He wrote a lot of short pieces in all sorts of different moods and styles. He wrote, this is what I wanted to specifically refer. While he had moved from Poland, he still very much considered himself to be a Polish nationalist, and he wrote a lot of piano music that was influenced by Polish dances. A variety of dances, like the mazurka was a popular Polish folk dance, the polonaise, and the waltz. There are a lot of different waltzes, a lot of different countries all had their own version of the waltz. And so Chopin wrote a lot of this kind of music influenced by Polish dances. He's also famous for, he might be most famous for, although that's arguable, his nocturnes. Nocturne literally translates as night piece. And they were slow, they're really beautiful, they tend to be very quiet and reflective. I'll provide a link to Chopin's Nocturne in E flat. You've all heard it. It's an incredibly famous piece of music. You will recognize